for a building permit, and then we go and look at our map and we just make sure that everything, the setbacks are correct and so forth. During one of these verifications, staff was reviewing a single family residential application. At the time that they looked at the plans, they realized that there were no sidewalks reflected on the plot plan. And so that just made us question, well, let's go look at the property. We went and looked at the property, and at that time we realized that the property, the building permit in question, was on a rural residential street, meaning it was constructed with open ditches, not curb and gutter. And pulled up the plat, looked at the plat, saw that they were accounted for. There was a sidewalk easement accounted for, and planning staff inferred that since there was no sidewalk provided for on the plot plan, that the applicant had likely opted to exercise the fee in lieu waiver, which is, I wouldn't say oftentimes, but it is far more frequent to approve that fee in lieu waiver option when you have open ditch roadways, and so when it's less likely, or if there's not a sidewalk network in the area. So in this instance, there was not a sidewalk network present in the area. So staff inferred that that option had been selected, and at that time invoiced for those fees in lieu. Those fees are not due at the time of building permitting, but again, in an effort to try to be as transparent as possible and there be no surprises on the back end, planning staff with permitting staff tries to assess as many of the known fees on the front end as possible so that they see that the developer will see what's kind of sitting there waiting to be accounted for. This can also include impact fees or if there are detention and lieu fees that come into play. So at that time, the applicant reached out and had discussions with permitting staff, followed up, had discussions with planning staff, the planning director, our former planning director. You'll see in your packet, I included some of the communication, the email communication that went on there. I've also included a copy of the plat for you, as well as the letter from the applicant requesting the appeal. And so basically that kind of sums up how we kind of got here today for this consideration. And what I guess what I wanted to kind of clarify is the appeal process is to allow the applicant to appeal the interpretation. So the planning director was presented with the situation, consulted the regulations, and you'll see where he cited the regulation, interpreted it and applied it accordingly. So the applicant is requesting your consideration. Did that happen appropriately? Did that happen correctly? Through the course of the appeal, leading up to the appeal, the applicant conferred with permitting staff, planning staff, as well as our business services coordinator, Troy Rice. He's here this evening. And our city attorney, Charles Finkenbinder, was also consulted. We're all here to provide answers to any questions, resources. So if you have something very specific related to the regulations or policy or process, please feel free. Any one of us can answer any of those questions. But that kind of sums everything up. Do you have any questions? I know it's not a common.
I have one question. When you
Sure.
said that the staff inferred that the in lieu, was that by inferring? Does that mean you did not receive a copy that they?
No. So when I said inferred, so every single family residential building permit application that comes in with what they call a plot plan. It's a site plan.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So with new construction, they have to indicate the sidewalk, and there was no sidewalk indicated. And of course, that it'd be just like if they didn't have a driveway. I would go see, well, why don't they have a driveway? So I went and looked at the property, and at that point is when it was discovered that the application was located on an open ditch street, and it's not uncommon to accept fees in lieu along open ditch streets when constructing the sidewalk in right-of-way is not feasible. You can see where the city does have a mechanism for constructing sidewalks on open ditch streets, what we call a local rural residential, where you have an open ditch construction and then the sidewalk is constructed on the other side of the ditch in an easement on private property. And so that's what is presented there. But again, I just inferred that the lack of the sidewalk, the location that it was proposed, it was very likely that the sidewalk was not going to be constructed. There's no sidewalk in the area. I noticed that there were other homes in the immediate area where there wasn't a sidewalk. I maybe incorrectly assumed that those fees had been paid in lieu for those properties. But this, this particular application, I was just like, okay, let me just make sure that we've done what we're supposed to do. Um, we had at the time, I went back and kind of researched what had happened along the street, and I did discover at that time that there had been a couple other applications that had come through, permits issued, and the process had been taken all the way through building and through construction and through the issuance of certificate of occupancy. And that happened prior to planning staff becoming involved in this verification process in mid-2022. A lot of those had already been issued a certificate of occupancy before that time, so we weren't even aware. And instituting this verification process sort of tightened up things like that permitting staff can be overloaded. They get a lot of applications, and anything that staff can do to work together to support each other in the review creates for a better product. So there was no effort to retroactively charge for those. That was an oversight on the city's part. That was an error, and we just going to move forward, and we're going to make sure we did it right moving forward from there. So those that were already closed out, those cases, they were not even a consideration. But I did check whatever was remaining and assign the fees accordingly from there.
So when you say all of the other houses you saw on Harbell, where there were instances where it was overlooked, are you saying just this one little small section of Harbell? Because
Correct.
Harbell is much longer than
And
that
I
section.
do apologize. We're specifically talking about phase 4 of Crest Haven, which is just the extension of Harbell, and it includes the 13 lots. I'm sure you're seeing it on your monitor.
Mm-hmm.
It includes the 13 lots, and of those 13 lots at the time, I believe 2 had been fully constructed and been closed out. The one that, I think there were 2 or 3, and I apologize, I think specifics are included in the report, but there were 2 or 3 that were current or had just been applied for that were in the permitting process, and then there were several other lots that have not been applied for as far as building permits.
Did y'all go back and look historically to see if this had been applied through the rest of Harbell, like even past this phase?
We did, and the subdivision regulations, specifically as they pertain to the requirements for sidewalks, came into play in about late 2005, early 2006. And so the timing of a lot of the developments on Round Mountain predate those regulations. So you will see a lack of a sidewalk network, especially in the first couple phases of Crest Haven. Those phases were developed prior to that regulation. I do believe that in Crest Haven Phase 3, the developer did pay the in lieu fees. I believe that our business services coordinator, Troy Rice, has had he's done some additional research on that. He might be able to provide some extra information. But yes, we did look at that. Go ahead.
So we don't necessarily have to handle this right now. We can wait till later, but
Sure.
I think you said it well earlier. This is not one we see all the time. So it would do me some good to hear what city or maybe the city attorney sees as our options here. What do we have the ability to do? I know we wear
Absolutely.
a couple different hats, so
Sure.
that would help me.
Okay.
Right.
How do you want?
I'm gonna let you, it's my understanding, and all of the people in the room that are a lot smarter than me can correct me if I'm wrong. It won't be the first time today I've been corrected. But the task in front of us tonight as the planning commission is to, with regard to the appeal, decide if the planning director properly interpreted the code. That is what our task is tonight. I would ask that that be corrected if I am incorrect. And so with that, I want to make sure that we understand where our focus needs to be tonight. Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The task in front of you is definitely to determine if the previous director, James, made the correct determination by interpreting the code as he did. So if you rule in favor of that, then it would stand. If you rule against that, then staff would need to know the interpretation of the code from the Planning Commission. So if you are saying that he interpreted that incorrectly, that falls to me. I need to know why you're saying that he interpreted incorrectly.
So if we understood, if we agree with the determination, what happens? If we don't, are we just serving from an advisory capacity to giving you our feedback, and then the city attorney and city staff will then go make determination based off, or is that it?
It would be your determination. You would tell us how you interpret it. It would go back to staff. If there are specific things that you're saying that we interpreted incorrectly, we would take another look at it based off of your interpretation of that code.
But the decision would still lie with y'all.
The decision with your considerations would lie with staff. If you're saying that it was if you're saying that there was a specific part of it that he interpreted incorrectly, but some of it he did, then we would take a look at that. If you're saying it was completely wrong, we would need to know as staff what you're saying he said wrong.
Okay. And then does this go to city council or stop with us and y'all?
If it is, if you're saying if you're saying that the previous director interpreted it incorrectly, then it would stop with you. If you concur with his decision, then there would be an opportunity for the applicant to appeal within 30 days. That would go to city council if he appeals.
Okay.
Those are great process questions. Go ahead.
I have one further process question here. I understand that we're looking at this from an advisory standpoint and that you guys will make a new decision based on our advice. Not to throw him under the bus, but is Charles not the person who's most qualified to tell us that? I'm having trouble understanding.
You can definitely ask questions through the chair to the city attorney if you would prefer.
Got it.
I missed that part.
I'll make sure to look at you and not Charles.
Yes, okay. All right. Are we good with our questions with Beth? All right. Beth, you
We're all
good?
available. if
Yeah.
there's
Oh, yeah.
more
You're
come
gonna
up, of
hang out
course.
in the I don't know
Thank you,
in the
Beth.
box that can be called back up here. So in the batter's box maybe. Okay. And so with that, is the applicant here, and would you like to speak? Sure. As you are making your way up, I will just remind everyone. No, come on. Yeah, come on. Keep coming. Yeah, come on. We're trying to be efficient. This is not a public hearing item, so this will not be opened up to the public. So we are certainly want to hear from you. So if you could start with your name and your address, and then it is typical that we go about 10 minutes. So just,
Okay.
and that's about what Beth went. I was watching my
My
clock
name
here.
is Jacob Longing. I live at 2740 Harbell Drive, Conway. And I know you've got it, but I'm going to read my letter. To whom it may concern, Jacob Longing Construction LLC was recently billed for in lieu sidewalk fees of $4,677 for the construction of a new home at 2860 Harbell Drive. And that was for Dr. Caleb Dixon. He's here with me today. The fee was added along with impact fees to the building permit application. So it was at the time of permitting that this happened. So the house was not constructed. We were just kind of getting the ball rolling. Shortly after, so once that happened, I contacted the planning department to say, hey, I think, we have an issue here. I've never got any of these before. I haven't, I think it's a mistake because this is the first time that we had discussed sidewalk in lieu fees or anything. If there was any waivers, I wasn't a part of that process. I wasn't a part of any of that. So shortly after, I received 2 additional invoices for 2850 Harbell Drive for the Hogman family, which they're having to work today, and for 2820 Harbell Drive for Monty and Megan Longing. For the same amount, $4,677, $4,677. So 2850 Harbell Drive, I believe, was permitted in late June or July of last year. And then 2820 Harbell Drive was permitted before that. So both of these houses were more than halfway through construction. In fact, 2850 Harbell is actually completed, and we had to push the closing back because I can't get a CO without paying, or they cannot get a CO without paying the $4,677. And I tried to see, hey, if we pay this and then y'all rule in my favor, would you refund it? And they said no. So it's kind of been a little bit of a problem for me to get that handled because obviously they don't want to lose nearly $5,000. So we've shuffled around their staying in their rental to try to make that all work out. So anyways, these homes were permitted months earlier and nearing completion. Neither were assessed in lieu sidewalk fees at the time of permitting. So 2860 Harbell Drive for Dr. Caleb Dixon was done at time of permitting. These were done well down the road. And they were also, none of these show sidewalks on the plot plan. Also, sidewalk and in lieu fees were also not required on the first two homes permitted and completed for clients by Jacob Lane Construction located at 2835 Harbell Drive and 2815 Harbell Drive. So I built those houses, went all the way through and CO'd them, and we never had any discussion sidewalks or sidewalk in lieu fees during the entire process. Unfortunately, three homes, 2820 Harbell Drive, 2850 Harbell Drive, and 2860 Harbell Drive, and two others under written contract for construction. That's 2830 Harbell Drive and 2845 Harbell Drive, which I have contracts to begin construction on. I did not quote sidewalk in those, and I did not quote sidewalk in lieu fees. So, because I did not have to do them in any of the previous, so, you know, I don't know really how to approach these people about saying, hey, you know, surprise, you are going to owe nearly $5,000 more than what you thought. So that's a major problem. Major problem for me is not as just a developer, but as a builder as well. Also, the sidewalk in lieu fees are not shown or noted on the approved plat, only a utility and sidewalk easement. So on my past plats that I've done, they always required a shaded to actually show these sidewalks, which I don't know, I should have brought a bigger one, but you can see they're actually shown, shaded and shown. So,
Yeah, you can pass that around.
So now that was done several years ago, but we had to shade and show the sidewalks. So there was no question about it. And that's been on, I just brought one plat, but I have obviously other ones that show sidewalks as well. And then on mine, this current one, there are no sidewalks shown, just an easement. So, I assumed that, no discussion of sidewalks, et cetera. I assumed that we would not have sidewalks. And that's why I proceeded the way I did during construction. So again, no sidewalks there on the approved and signed plat. There's also not set there. So there's no, on top of that, I've built other houses on Impey Trail, around Crest Haven, multiple ones in Crest Haven, other ones on Round Mountain. I've never done sidewalks or sidewalk in lieu fees on any of those, but they probably fall in that same kind of time period before they started their back checking, I guess late summer or whenever they did that. And I also know that they're not doing sidewalks on some of the other subdivisions in the area that are no sidewalks or in lieu fees on similar subdivisions in the area that were platted at the same time. And I know there may be some different things taken into consideration as far as, when they were platted, being out of the county, et cetera. So I think that kind of also played into maybe why these first homes weren't required to have sidewalks, because we weren't doing them anywhere on Round Mountain at that time that I'm aware of. So I just said, in the name of consistency and precedent, Jacob Lane Construction LLC, developer and building contractor, respectfully request on behalf of the lot owners and Jacob Lane Construction LLC, the sidewalk and sidewalk in lieu fees be waived on lots 1 through 12 at Crest Haven Phase 4. Are there any questions for me?
So out of the fees that you're requesting to be waived, how many of those are currently under contract?
So currently, so 2815 and 2835 Harbell are complete and CO'd, people living there, those are down the road. So currently I have 2860 Harbell Drive. That's the first one that I got in lieu sidewalk fees billed on, which again, I did not figure those into my bid on the house. I've got 2850 Harbell Drive, which is complete and waiting on this hearing to be CO'd so the people can move in. I've got 2820 Harbell Drive that will be finished in April. And then I've also got, sorry.
The 2845.
Yeah, 2845. I'm
Okay.
trying to find my stuff here.
Sorry, I'm trying. Me too. Yeah, I feel like Jacob. I think is it 2820, 2850. No, there's 5 here.
Yeah, sorry. 2830 Harbell Drive and 2845 Harbell Drive are also under written contract. between my construction company and the people, my clients, with no sidewalk fees. So that's and that's 2830 Harbell Drive is the Dykes family, and 2845 is the Conley family.
Jacob, just so I can make sure I'm tracking with you, this third paragraph here that starts unfortunately, that one right there, those 3 addresses that are listed, or 5, I can't, 5, are those
There's
the 5?
5 in question.
There's 5, okay.
So there's 2 that are complete and
Okay.
CO'd and moved on, and there's 5 additional ones that are under contract or in the construction phase that weren't, the sidewalks weren't considered in the bidding process because I didn't know.
And out of the 5 that were just named, when you were notified about the new fees, those were already under contract.
So 2 were under, well, yes. So out of those 5, 4 were under, so yes, all 5 were under contract and bid out prior to. 2 were under construction and nearing completion. 2860 Harbell Drive was permitted, and that's when the first in lieu fee email was sent. And then 2830 Harbell Drive and 2845 Harbell Drive are under written contract between me and my client, but they have not been permitted yet. There's no real estate contract, or we've got a real estate contract, but we have not started the homes. We've not pulled a permit from the city. Sorry if I'm not making sense.
I think those are the 2 that I was trying to get clarification on. So with those people, those clients would be aware at this point that.
Right, but I've already, as a contractor, I've already agreed to a price.
Okay,
to build
okay,
the
that's
home
what I was
for
trying to
them.
understand.
So I've
Okay.
already agreed on these 5 on a price.
Okay.
So yeah, so I've already, because I didn't know we were going to have to do this till basically just now.
I got a question. You had mentioned that you weren't aware of a waiver, or don't let me put words in your mouth,
Right.
but made a comment to that effect. But you mentioned a waiver, so I'm just trying to get clarity on what is the waiver. What was your understanding of the waiver?
Well, for me,
Seems to be a disconnect.
Yeah, so for me, I just got when I applied for the building permit for Caleb, and I got my bill sheet back where I was going to owe for all my impact fees and the parks and the streets and all the fees and the building permit. I also had attached to that same sheet $4,677 for an in lieu fee. So that's the first time. There was no discussion with me prior. It was just I just received a bill.
Yeah.
So when
please.
this was first reviewed,
Hey, Ethan, can I just stop you? Bill, or not Bill. Beth, can you maybe, yes, let's try to get Adam's question, and then I'm coming straight to Ethan. So Ethan, if you need to write it down, I'm one that forgets, so.
And I would like to clarify that anytime a waiver to the sidewalk construction requirements is issued, it does not mean that they have to pay the fees in lieu. They can construct sidewalks. That is absolutely always our hope, is that the sidewalks will be constructed. But in the event that criteria exists where they're not feasible or they're impractical, then the waiver is approved as a path of relief if that's the better path to take. Staff, by looking at the plot plan and seeing that there were no sidewalks proposed, but seeing that there was a sidewalk easement on the plat, and again, it's a local rural residential street construction, which means there's no curb, there's no gutter, as with the other subdivisions that had been mentioned, the sidewalks are shown because construction was required in those instances. This showed that the open ditch, the easement, is because the sidewalk would have to be located on private property. And that is why there is a place reserved for that sidewalk to be constructed. So staff, in doing the verification, saw that there was no sidewalk proposed on the plot plan, looked at the property on the map, saw the plat that there was an easement and that there were no sidewalks previously constructed, and maybe incorrectly inferred that the waiver had been approved, as it has in a lot of other open ditch scenarios, and assessed those fees. Again, they don't have to be paid. The sidewalk can always be constructed.
And onto that point, now that I've already got houses without sidewalk that are complete,
Yeah, how will that look?
I'm backed into a corner to where really in lieu fees are my only route, even though sidewalks are cheaper. They're nearly half the price as the in lieu fees. you know, I'm kind of backed into a corner now to where I can't really have houses. I can't have if we're going to do sidewalks, we all have to do them. Because, I mean, we can't have houses with them and without them. I mean, it just look ridiculous. I mean, we're building very nice homes here, and that wouldn't be uniform. And I don't think that's good for the city. So.
Right. Ethan, what was your question?
So on the punch list, when it was reviewed October 29th, 2019,
Mhm.
item number 63 that said sidewalk utility easement along right of way,
Right.
you know, so if you're putting a easement in there, I mean, wouldn't you infer that that has a sidewalk?
No, because all my other ones I've ever done showed a shaded sidewalk and required showed sidewalk on the plat. So there'd be no way for me to know. Now, maybe that's just by pure luck that every one that I've ever done showed shaded, you know, 4 foot, you know, or however much sidewalk in the exact locations, and, you know, all that shown on the plats typically. So when they were not required to be, you know, when they weren't shown on this plat, you know, I had no idea.
So you didn't ask the question, you just made an assumption and went forward with that. Is that
Right,
correct?
because they're not shown, so therefore an easement and a sidewalk are two different things. I mean, so
Right.
you give easements on the back of property, et cetera, for utilities, stuff like
Right.
that all the time.
But
that aren't
where I
necessarily
sit
used.
at is as a developer, you should know the development code when you're going to development. And I feel like it's pretty clear that sidewalks are to be constructed. So I would ask the question of why they're not shown. Because Beth, this may be a question for you. Other new neighborhoods up on Round Mountain, are they paying in lieu of fees?
If they are applicable and if the waiver has been approved. So again, several of the developments, like we've talked about, several of Jacob's previous projects up there, I know on Mountain Park Road, I believe, a lot of those developments predate the regulations, so sidewalks would not be constructed or fees in lieu approved in that instance. There are other developments so if you see on page, I don't want to misquote. If you see on page 4 of the report, there are 3 instances when sidewalk construction is when there's an exception to the requirement. And that's when you have a minor replat that doesn't create any new lots, so that isn't applicable here. When there are new lots created in an I3 zoning district, which is our intensive industrial district. And then if you have large lot subdivisions that are located outside the city limits. A large lot subdivision is a subdivision where each lot has 150 feet of street frontage or more. So all of those that are also being developed on Round Mountain at this time were developed and had approval prior to being annexed into the city. So it all looks very similar, but there are different criteria that apply to each approval. So I would say the easement, Jacob, whoever his design professional was, absolutely followed it to the letter, to the T. There's the typical cross-section for the local rural residential road is included in your packet. That is from our City of Conway standard details, and it shows because the sidewalk has to be placed on private property, it has to be placed in an easement, and that's why it's drawn just like the section requires. So that it was drawn exactly as it should have been.
Thanks, Beth. Are there any other questions for Jacob?
I have just a couple.
Yeah.
You've built all the homes in this subdivision?
That's correct.
When was the first home you built there?
You know, I don't have my phone, but it would have been, I know that they moved in April of 2022, is when the first home was completed in April 2022, and the next one I believe was completed in September of 2022. Those are the two that have been, and I don't have my phone back there, but I need to pull those particular building permits up on the city website and look the exact date. But yeah, I know their move-in dates were it would have been the spring of 2022 and then the fall of 2022 on the 2 that were CO'd without in lieu fees or sidewalks.
And when did the regulations get put into place that we require sidewalks?
And Troy, that's what Troy was sharing with me. I believe the homes that were CO'd prior to the fees being assessed, one was issued a certificate of occupancy on March 30th. So it predated our additional verification process going into place. And the other one was in mid-October. And again, I think this started shortly after that is when I did a verification in late October And so at that point, both of those applications had already received their certificate of occupancy, so they predated that verification.
Laura, can I have a follow-up? So one of them was, going to miss the terminology here, but permitted without the in lieu of fees being assessed that fell after this July 2022 date that
Correct.
you revamped the process?
Correct. I don't do every verification. We have a big, we don't
Sure,
have-
yeah,
We have a lot of applications, and again, it was something we're all figuring out. So I didn't do the verification
Sure,
for that
yeah.
particular one. I don't know what happened. It was likely another error, which is the result of this hopefully improved practice. However, yes, that is true.
Okay.
Are we?
So wait, you said
I've-
permitted. It was issued a certificate of occupancy.
Yeah,
After
I
it
just
was
missed the
permitted
terminology
first.
there. Yeah.
Correct, yes.
One small question to our task. It is not our task to decide what should be done here. It is our task to decide if the decision was made we think is correct. Is that accurate? So we don't need to discuss what we think should happen to Jacob. We need to discuss if the decision was correct or not.
Our task is to decide if the planning director properly interpreted the code or not. This is a tough situation for everybody, all the way around.
I have one question. So, I guess my question is, it sounds like there was, I guess just even your word inferred that there was a permit. So I guess, do we have a process in place? So if Jacob didn't say he was going to build sidewalks and his clients didn't say they were going to pay for a sidewalk, then how do we go back after the fact, since it passed through the permitting department with his plans as is, with only an easement and no sidewalks constructed?
But if you look at the approved plat, the requirement to construct sidewalks was always there. There was never an expectation that sidewalks were not required. Again, the issuance of the waiver to allow fees in lieu to be paid instead of constructing sidewalks is simply, again, it's a relief valve. If the sidewalks cannot be constructed or should not be due to certain criteria, they can pay that fee in lieu. There was never an instance where there was a decision made that all of a sudden sidewalks are now required. Sidewalk construction was always required as part of the subdivision regulations. And again, yes, Jacob is correct. They are shown in an easement, but that is because they had to be placed on private property.
I'm going to
And
just
which
stop
is-
us right here.
yeah.
Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
We are helping Jacob meet his stand goal tonight. Does anybody have any questions for him? All right, Jacob, I'm going to let you go to the batter's box for just a moment. Thank you. And then go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so I guess another question of staff is, we have seen in the past requests for waivers of masonry requirements or things like that. Why is this proposed to us as an appeal of an interpretation of code and not a request for this to be waived?
There is no mechanism to waive the requirement in whole. That the waiver process is the waiver from the requirement to construct. So in the event, there's a whole list of criteria in the subdivision regulations when the director, the planning director can consider. And if the planning director opts to deny, it can come to you and they can appeal to you for a waiver to be granted. And some of those conditions include if there's not a sidewalk network present, if there are no or few pedestrian generators in the area like schools or churches and so forth, when a sidewalk network might be impractical. There's a whole list of criteria to consider. And in the event that it meets several of those, the planning director has the authority to say, okay, if constructing sidewalks is impractical or infeasible, you have this other option. You can pay fees in lieu. But either way, either we have to construct sidewalks or we have to pay the fees in lieu. There is no mechanism to just not build sidewalks.
So I'm struggling now. What is different about a masonry requirement or some of the other things we've seen in sidewalks?
Sidewalks apply equally. Masonry requirements are specific to non-residential development.
I'm just using
Sure.
that as an example.
Sure. But what I would also say is sidewalk construction is required for non-residential developments. There is no waiver there. So this is a consistent application across all developments for sidewalk construction. So again, a masonry requirement is kind of in a different category. It's not a waiver that is issued for a masonry requirement. It's an exception to development regulations that is then issued by the planning director.
Okay.
It's not a waiver.
The sidewalks are a mode of transportation. So they're included like roads. You've got to build roads into your development. So sidewalks are included the same way.
Okay.
So like masonry is aesthetic.
Are there any other questions for Beth? Go
I
ahead.
do. So the fees that are assessed in lieu of building the sidewalks, where do those fees go? Is there just like a fund so that the
I should
city
have
can do
explained
that?
that. That's a good
at
question,
later
yes.
point?
So all fees in lieu of construction that are collected go into a sidewalk construction fund, and then the Transportation and Engineering Department uses those funds to construct sidewalks in an area that needs sidewalks, or to maintain the existing sidewalk network in this nearby area if there was one, which there currently is not because of the date of a lot of this development. So those fees are collected there.
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
So, sorry.
No, you're good.
The, some of those questions that you've noticed, I did have to print off a copy of this section of the code for the commissioners. So this section 9 of our subdivision code, and some of those questions are, for example, the funds shall be deposited into a general sidewalk fund to be used solely for the addition of new sidewalks and maintenance is on page 47. So that's where it specifically talks about that in the code.
Thank you, Chris, for
Thank you.
making sure we had a copy of that. Are there any other questions for Beth at this time?
If we agree that the interpretation was held out correct, he does have two options. He can pay the fee or build the sidewalks.
You can
correct?
pay the fee or build a sidewalk or seek a further appeal to city council.
Beth, we're going to let you take a step back. I am going to, for my own curiosity, let me make sure I say it correctly. Mr. Finkenbinder, can you come up and kind of, give us your role in all of this?
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Spurgers was intent on me talking tonight, and now we're all going to regret it.
Well, the good news is we gave everybody else 10. We're going to give you 5.
It's probably 4 minutes too many.
Okay.
But, so let me explain. My role is not as the representative, legal or otherwise, of the planning department. I'm the city attorney, and so my role is to advise everyone in here when asked a legal question. So as was pointed out before, and let me just say that I've highlighted some of these. The sidewalk, the subdivision ordinance was passed originally, and this was 06-1. Let's see, 06-117, I believe it is, 119. So this is by ordinance, and that's where the requirement for sidewalks comes from. It doesn't come from the planning department, it comes from the city council back in 2006. The city council in the sidewalk ordinance also provided for the waiver process and determined when sidewalks would be required. So that's where all this comes from. When you read the subdivision ordinance that's displayed on the planning department website, it's actually reprinting the ordinance that was passed by the city council. So, and from my perspective as an attorney, the city council was very clear: the sidewalk shall be constructed within any subdivision in accordance with these regulations. On both streets, there are only 3 exceptions that the council listed, none of which apply here, one of which is subdivisions in an I3 zoning district. Sidewalks along residential streets shall be constructed by the homeowner or builder. The sidewalk shall be installed prior to the final inspection and issuance of certificate of occupancy. Any subdivider developer required sidewalk shall be constructed concurrently with other subdivision infrastructure. Now, here's the waiver part. Is not as I'm going to try to make this clear. The subdivider developer may request a waiver from the sidewalk construction requirements. The council made clear such waiver shall only be approved for unusual circumstances. The following factors were listed by the council in determining whether or not a waiver should be granted, and those include RDOT determination that a sidewalk is not allowed within a state right-of-way, pedestrian traffic generators such as parks and schools. There's factors that are listed. So in my view as an attorney reading this, the city council expressed that waivers should not be granted as a matter of routine. They should be only in unusual circumstances. And this ordinance was passed, again, 2006. far before any of this development, as I understand the testimony that was given. And as was pointed out, any funds that are contributed, this is the in lieu of sidewalk construction funds. The city council is specific on that, as was pointed out by the planning department director. He's correct. The funds shall be deposited into a general sidewalk fund to be used solely for the addition of new sidewalks and maintenance of the existing sidewalk network. The dispersal of funds from the sidewalk fund shall be at the direction of the Conway City Council. So as an attorney, not advocating for one side or the other or one position or the other, all I can do is provide my legal advice to the commission, is that as I see it, the first step in any discussion of this is to establish what does the ordinance require, not just the regulations. And clearly the ordinance requires that sidewalks be put in this development. It's mandatory from the city council. The second question then is this development within the city limits? I believe the testimony and what's before the commission establishes that the development is within the city limits. That's where it would apply. I think there's different rules if it were in the territorial jurisdiction zone. If those two questions are answered in the affirmative, then the only interpretation is that sidewalks are required. If the developer, builder, homeowner wants to request a waiver, they have to make that request. It's not something that should be inferred or assumed. The ordinance is clear that they need to make that request, and it should only be granted per the city council in unusual circumstances.
I have a
questions
question.
for Mr.
Yes.
Hickenmeyer?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let's start with Lori.
Okay. So my question is, I guess I'm still confused on if the plat was approved through the permitting department and it was just an easement, there were no sidewalks drawn in. He has sold 2, 3, however many houses before we noticed this. So now we're going to have houses in that subdivision. There's going to be blank spots just randomly. The sidewalks won't connect. We're talking about what, 10 houses total, maybe 12, whatever the total is in there.
lots.
And then others are in a legal binding contract, and he didn't do the sidewalks on the other one. I guess I'm just, for the public's perspective, the neighborhood's perspective, how it's going to look. It almost seems like it was an oops, like it got overlooked. And so then what is in place, I guess, to make sure that there's not the inferred that someone did the fees in lieu form? If it's a form, if it's something they apply for, whatever, if there wasn't one from the builder and there wasn't one from the homeowner, then I guess I'm just, confused on how it would be the builder's responsibility at this point. I mean, moving forward, yes, maybe there'll be random pieces of sidewalk throughout that neighborhood, but from the past, how would that be his?
Well, there's no mechanism from the city council ordinances to provide for any kind of waiver. As I understand it, there may have been a prior missing, something fell through, and other properties were allowed to be even occupied. I can't speak to that because I wasn't there when it happened. I'm not a member of the planning.
So there's not a fees in lieu waiver piece of paper that someone has to acknowledge that we're not going to do a sidewalk, we're going to do.
That would be an excellent question for a member of the
Okay.
planning department.
Okay.
All I can say is the ordinance does not provide for it. What it does require is that a waiver has to be requested before it can be considered. And it can only be granted in unusual circumstances.
So I have a legality question from the place of built to and was allowed permitted occupancy, got the certificate, people moved in. Now he's building some others. And so we're requiring now this fee, either he builds sidewalks or he pays the fee for these other pieces that are almost built and the people can't move in, and then these others that are under contract. But we're not requiring the other two that we already have people living in. Like, how do you not either require all of it or nothing?
Legally, all I can do is interpret the ordinance. And that's not provided for in the ordinance. It's an excellent policy question, and it might be a question ultimately that lands before a judge, but it's a question that I can't answer because it's not provided for in the law.
Beth, do you want to respond to why there were, I think I have this right, 3 that were invoiced and 2 that were not?
Correct. two that were issued certificates of occupancy prior to this verification. It was determined after planning staff met with other staff, Troy primarily, and the planning director at the time, that since we bore some of the responsibility in not catching it in an inspection at the end prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy, or in the approval of a waiver and fees in lieu, that since we bore some of that responsibility, we would not be punitive and go back and require the construction or the fees in lieu. Again, the requirement to construct sidewalks has always been there. It was approved as part of the plat, as part of the road section. That can be done, but we wanted to compromise and share in that responsibility, as it were. But they could absolutely go back and construct sidewalks.
If the city were to say on those two, hey, you've got to pay the fee or build a sidewalk, obviously, usually the holdup is the CO to make them do that.
Correct,
So
and,
what is
and that's why the position was adopted. It clearly states that it's to be done prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy. Since it was not done, that's the position that was adopted after
Right.
planning staff conferred with multiple other folks.
But if you did try to enforce that, would the city be able to put a lien or anything because not following building code?
I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I might actually,
Yeah.
I think we switched back to a legal question, so I'm off the bench. I don't believe as a principle of law that once the ordinance was not followed, and I'm just assuming that it wasn't, if a certificate of occupancy was issued, regardless of the fact that the property in question was in violation of the requirement that a sidewalk be constructed or in lieu fees be requested, I don't believe legally, I think the city is foreclosed at that point. I don't believe that a court anywhere in the country would allow, because there would be no time limit, go back 10 years, 12 years. The city is required to follow its own regulations and its own rules. And that goes for cities, state governments, county governments, can't deviate from it. So once the COO goes out, in my view, legally, the city would not be able to impose requirements that should have been met before the CEO was issued.
I have another process question here because I think we all want to solve this, and I don't think we're supposed to solve this. I think what we're supposed to answer is if James' interpretation was correct. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and we're gonna go with the planning director. So
Sorry, I'm sorry.
yeah.
If the planning director's interpretation was correct, and if we say that it was not correct, we must explain why we feel it was not correct. Is that accurate, Chris, director? Charles, whoever.
It's my understanding that if you're saying that the planning director's interpretation of the code is incorrect, then you need to explain which portions of it and what was incorrect about it. Because if you're saying that I was incorrect about the length of the sidewalk but not the fees, then that changes the assessment.
Understood. Okay, one more question here, and then I'm good. I feel like the easy answer is up here, and I don't know if you can answer this or not. Do you feel the interpretation was correct, or does that matter? Is that relevant? Because I would look to the expert.
I think that's a fair question.
Well, of course you do. I believe that the ordinance is worded clearly, and a legal principle that all lawyers are familiar with. I know Mr. Shaw is more familiar than I'll ever be with this principle of law, is that we have to read laws as they are written, in accordance with their plain meaning. To me, there's no ambiguity in the sidewalk ordinance. It clearly states that if it's within the city limits after 2006, it's a residential area. If it meets those requirements, sidewalks are required, period. And the only exception to that that's created by the law, by the ordinance, is if the homeowner, builder, developer requests a waiver. And then it's granted only in unusual circumstances. So I don't see how this could be interpreted otherwise. And I understand the arguments that were made. It doesn't matter.
Well, what about the timeline for the waiver? If it just says a waiver for the sidewalk construction, but it doesn't need to say at the time of the plat being presented, like, is the builder going to make that decision, or would that still be? I don't think that would be up to the homeowner of a subdivision at that point if they didn't want it.
Now, and if there's a question about, now we're getting away from the plain meaning of the ordinance. A lot of times, which is true, laws have to be interpreted by administrative agencies like the planning department for the city of Conway. That's really where in my view as a lawyer, the commission might have to make a judgment call. Did the commission, in enforcing the clear ordinance, like with a time requirement, when does this have to be filed? When does it have to be acted on? Those are rules that the planning department, for example, might come up with in order to breathe life into this ordinance. And that's where the commission might have to decide whether or not the planning director interpreted that correctly, if he's keeping with the spirit of the ordinance.
Quick question for me then, and I think the answer to this is no, but y'all please correct me if I'm wrong. Can we say that we agree that planning director's interpretation was correct, but given these circumstances, we recommend X course of action here? Or can we not say yes, but? Can we only say yes or no and?
To go against the ordinance, the city council would have to approve that, correct?
Right. Well, I would never advise a board or commission to go against an ordinance.
Right, but like if you recommended not putting sidewalks in.
But I
then-
think we agree, the city says that we should all have sidewalks, but we've also written in, number 10 says there is an option for a waiver, but there is no direction on the waiver. So to me, so none of us are in this position again, including Mr. Longing or anyone else. It seems like that the waiver, the fees in lieu needs to be decided. There needs to be a timeline. There needs to be something about it being submitted.
A form.
A form.
A
Check it off. Yes. I mean,
All right, I'm gonna thank you. Adam, did you have something?
I'll save mine for when we're in commission.
Yes. Are there any other questions?
I just have one more, and I understand completely, like,
Well,
what
hang
you're
on.
saying.
Are there any more questions for Mr. Finkenbinder?
Well, yes.
Okay, I didn't know if yours was for him or for the commission.
Because this is what I'm struggling. If I agree with this wholeheartedly, then we're back to the issue that the planning department has, either through mistake and error, decided how they're going to apply it. They've chosen to not charge him for 2 lots because of mistake, but now we're going to go back and try to catch it right here. So we can pass this all day long, but if it's not followed, what are we doing anyway? And I think that's what you're struggling with.
I agree. That's exactly what I'm struggling with, and I'll.
Are there any more questions for Mr. Finkenbinder from the commission? Okay, I'm going to ask you to go to the batter's box, and then with that, we will bring it the bench. And so it's the best analogy I have. So with that, I'm going to bring it back into commission, realizing that we may get into a discussion where we need to bring someone back up.
And
So-
can we also be clear here, because obviously this is a question for you as the chair. Step in if you'd like. Our task is to say if we think this was read correctly or not, applied correctly or not. And from what we just understood, we don't have the option of saying we believe it was applied correctly, but a different action should be taken. That is my understanding.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
No.
Well, almost there. But the next thing is when that discussion gets circular.
Yes, somebody turned her microphone off. Yes, so I'm going to bring this back in. Well, first off, I want to thank everyone for a good discussion this evening. There's a lot of passion around this, and this is a tough topic. So thank you to the applicant, to the planning department, city attorney. And so with that, I'm going to bring it back into commission and the question that is in front of us, and then I'll let Chris make any comments that he may have if the planning director properly interpreted the code. Before the commission begins to discuss, Chris, do you have any comments?
So I did have a chance to review this, and I'm just going to read the code. The Director of Planning and Development shall have the authority to grant such waivers or may defer requests to the Planning Commission. Action by the Director of Planning and Development may be appealed to the Planning Commission. If a waiver is granted, the subdivision developer shall contribute funds in lieu of sidewalk construction equal to 4-year rolling average of the weighted average amounts listed for concrete walks in the 4 most recent editions of the Arkansas Department of Transportation weighted averages unit prices. This in lieu fee shall be subject to a maximum fee equivalent to 150 feet of street frontage per lots for lots intended for single family or 2 family dwelling uses. There shall no maximum fee for lots containing or intended for other uses. And I just read that as written in addition to that, on page 6 of your packet, on the typical street section, the note specifically states sidewalk construction and/or in lieu fee and the associated easement to be required as shown on the plat or per subdivision ordinance. And that's on our typical street sections for the city of Conway. It is my belief that this was interpreted correctly by the previous director, and I stand by his decision.
Thank you, Chris.
Before we get into it, I need to recuse myself from the conversation and the vote.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So Alexander will, I think, stay out of this conversation. But with that, I will bring it back into planning. So I know that there's some discussion that needs to be had here. I think it's worthwhile and good discussion. I would just ask that we be mindful and respectful of one another and try our best to keep it one at a time, please.
And sorry, one more procedural thing to understand here, because we've had this thing before. I think we all want to solve it. It's not on us to solve it. It's on us to answer the binary question, yes? And my understanding is that if we do anything different, it doesn't matter. Is that, or do we have a way to change this or actually affect relief? That's my question.
I'm going to respond, and then Adam, I know you've got some things you want to say. That the way that it has been explained to me is that our job is to decide if the planning director properly interpreted the code on this issue. I think if the planning commission, secondary to that, wants to have a discussion and an agenda item about a recommendation about the city subdivision code and charge staff to make some tweaks to that, I think that is certainly worthwhile discussion that would happen outside of this motion and this agenda item. Okay. Go ahead, Adam.
So I'll try to be concise.
No,
I heard earlier when I asked the question that we were giving recommendations from an advisory capacity and that you would take it back and make your decision. So I don't feel put in the box of what we can and can't do because we're just giving advice.
Right.
So given that, where I'm at on it, I'm happy to make a motion whenever is ready, if that's what's needed, is that while the code may be clear, it became unclear when it was inconsistently applied. And how there could be any reasonable expectation from Mr. Longing to expect these fees to show up after two were granted certificate of occupancy, I don't think is reasonable. I think the city shows in one of the bullets in our packet that there was a need to improve this process. I think that's what that July 2022 bullet was about, with working with permitting and the city attorney. And so I feel like there has already been some implication that this needed to be improved. In fact, we even missed one after July 2022. So I am all for verifying the process, coming up with, I think this is where y'all are coming from, coming up with clear steps about when these fees are identified, when they're assessed, when they're due. I have a problem, again, I'm just giving you my advice. I don't know I'm still confused on what we have the ability to do or not, is to not assess these fees in this situation, given the inconsistent application. Doesn't seem equitable. So that would be where I'm at. I guess, again, I'm not going to do it now, but I would be willing to make a motion to.
Well, I'm gonna hold you on that
No,
just a second.
okay.
Okay, can I keep
Sure.
that one with you for just a second? Okay, I would like for everyone to get the opportunity to speak within commission. Sure, yeah, we'll go around.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. And if we are able to make that advice, that would be my advice, that for what has been done, that it's not fair that Mr. Longing or any homeowner be assessed for that. Now, I do think when we look at the 12 lots in the subdivision moving forward for what he doesn't have under contract, I think it would be fair for us to say, we messed up, you won't be penalized for it. Moving forward, this is what we'll do. But I agree 100% with what you said.
I'm in the same space as those. Like, I understand what's here, but it was not applied consistently. And you can't, oh, sorry, we made a mistake, and then choose what you're going to apply and not. It either applies or it doesn't, to keep it fair and equitable. And the builders need to know exactly what's expected of them. Like, it's read off in here every time, and if they don't know, you can't expect them to go back and do that.
Nothing to repeat. I agree.
Yes, I said on the impact fees are charged at the end of the project, like sidewalk and lieu of fees are at the end. as a licensed professional, you should know the code in which you're building and developing in. So again, I think that the city did make a mistake in not catching these, and that's a need for improvement. And the city should go back and improve the processes of that. And I think over the years, you wait at the end and you got your impact fees unless you ask for it. But now usually they send out a little list of fees in the beginning. I think when they issue a permit, those fees that they're expected to be done, including all the fees, should be given when a permit is issued, just so there is no surprise on the end, because sometimes impact fees, if a builder comes from out of town and doesn't know, those impact fees can smoke you on the back end that you didn't know about. So again, the ones that are already CO'd, per legal things, city cannot go back on those. But any that are not, the code should be interpreted as is stated in the code.
Or I agree with Adam, and I think that what has been done, and I would argue a little step further, anything that's under contract with a legal contract and a bank loan already secured on, I mean, I think that's going to be super hard to go back and bill that person, and especially when he figured his building specs off of a budget. And then moving forward, yes, if it's required to do the in lieu, then I just think making sure builders know when that in lieu form needs to be completed. And I think that's the part we're missing and why we're here. Because if there was an actual form or a box you check or whatever, then that would have been caught by permitting and by planning, hopefully. And maybe that's all we need to do in the future to not have to be here again. So.
Anyone else in commission that feels wait, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, and this, I could really be wrong, so I'm real hesitant to say this, but we heard that sidewalks were, I'm with everybody else as well, just by the way. We heard that sidewalks were half the price. There's still 7 that need to be constructed. It's probably likely that sidewalks are not going to be constructed and that fees are going to be paid, and so at the end of the day, the subdivision's probably going to end up with sidewalks, right? If you do that math out of this whole thing.
I mean, if in the interest of economic,
theoretically that could happen, right? If the 5 are waived, the 7 houses are built, likely you're not going to just piece together sidewalks.
Or he could just know in advance to add that in.
Well, but you're probably not gonna. But I mean, because you're not just gonna have 7 houses one way or the other. I mean, there's either going to be 7.
Add the fee in lieu. That would be added into their contract, and he would know that up front now.
But if you did the total price, $46.77 times 7 houses, if it's half the price to do.
Well, I did it times 5. It was about $24,000.
But those 5 are going to be out. The request is for those 5 to be out. I mean, if you generally take everything that's been said here to be true, there is a pathway for the subdivision to end up with sidewalks, with fees paid, and for the 5 to appeal to be upheld. I'm just asking the question that there is some math there that somebody smarter than me can do. If it was applied that way. So, with that, is there anyone else from the commission that has anything? Adam, I think that you are in a place where you would like to make a motion.
Yeah, so I would welcome the help of Chris or others on exactly what you're looking for, because I want to give the direction that's needed. But I'll kind of restate where I'm at, that the code is not clear given the inconsistent application, and the direction would be to continue to work on what looks like was started last year, make any clarification changes needed with identifying these preemptively on the front end, some of the things we've talked about, and then partner that with consistent application moving forward so we're not back in this situation. So I will motion that however I need to.
Can I ask one more question to Mr. Finkenbinder before we do that? If not, say no. I'm okay.
Yeah, certainly, you're fine.
If we're ready to vote.
I think this topic deserves the time that it needs.
Because I want to be clear here that I'm trying to work in Mr. Longing's interest here. So, Mr. Finkenbinder, question would be: there is no way that we can waive fees. If the fees are to be waived, we can make advice, but we cannot waive them. The only body that can waive these fees is who?
Well, ultimately, it would be the city council, since they wrote the ordinance.
So,
as I understand the ordinance, it allows for an appeal of if there's a waiver request that's made. I'm not sure that a waiver request was made in this case, but then I'm not sure what the process is. All this happened before, of course, I became involved, but And that's not a slight against anybody. I just was pulled in kind of when there was a problem. I'm not seeing that ultimately anyone other than the city council would make a decision on whether it would be waived.
So this was my hang up, and this is why I needed to ask this question.
I think it's fair.
If I think that Mr. Longing should not have to pay the fee, the only way, based on what we've been given, that I can do that is to say that I think this was applied correctly, so that Mr. Longing then has the chance to appeal it, right? Because if I say it wasn't, it goes back to you guys to discuss again. Is that accurate?
Can we not just make a recommendation to the city council?
Yeah.
I would defer that to the city attorney.
So I think that is a fair. I think that is a fair question. I think that tonight what we have heard is that exactly what Drew said. That if we uphold it, it gets appealed to the city council. If we say no, we don't agree with what the planning director did, it goes back to the planning department. And then what we've now heard from you, we've heard a lot of things, but now not from you, but just in general tonight. Is that the city council is really the only group, because they made the ordinance in 2006, that they are the only group that can decide really what needs to happen here. And so I do feel somewhat backed into a corner in that at the end of the day, we've been asked to make a decision of which we're really not the decision-making body. We're somewhat the input body.
So I would prefer to make a recommendation to the city council.
Agreed.
I don't want to put out there that we agree with this interpretation and then leave it up to the city attorney and the planning staff to take it to the city council.
I do want to.
We've gotten our feedback.
No, that's my question. Can we make a recommendation?
You can, but just to clarify, it wouldn't be the city attorney taking anything to the city council.
It would be.
Right. It would be us making the recommendation to the council, which is not what we've been asked to do, but what Adam's question is fair. We can do.
I do want to be careful that we're following what's on our agenda, because the agenda item for tonight is an appeal on the determination of the previous director, his interpretation of the code.
Yeah.
If you are forwarding a variance request to city council for consideration, or a waiver request to city council for consideration, then that is not what's on the agenda.
So I don't want to get backed into putting something out there that can be misinterpreted based off the confusion that I don't think any of us understand here.
Mm-hmm.
So I will make a motion to not agree with the director's interpretation based off the inconsistent application and the language being ambiguous given the inconsistent application.
Well,
Regardless of our decision, Jacob Longing can still appeal to city council on his own, correct? Regardless of
I think it's a fair question. At this point, I do appreciate, and Chris, I do not want to get on the other side of the fence with you here. But as the chair, it is an agenda item. We have been tasked to make a decision. If the council feels that a recommendation needs to go to the city council, I will accept that and we will move this forward. So Adam, if you are prepared to make that, I am prepared to accept that.
Okay, so I will take friendly amendments once I get done with this, but I will make a motion to give a recommendation to the city council that the interpretation of the code was not correct, giving how it was inconsistently applied, with the further direction to continue to make improvements and clarity of process so we're not in this situation again. Probably could have been worded better, but.
So
Can we maybe team effort this word?
do I understand your recommendation to be that, yes, we think that the reading was correct and the application was not, and so in this instance, further consideration is needed? Is that accurate?
I hate putting out there that any part of this was correct.
I would argue that if we just, again, I'm going to go back since you're wanting us to refer to what we have here, our documentation. Item number 10 says the developer may request a waiver from the sidewalk construction. No waiver was requested. He was granted 2 certificates of occupancy. He has moved along with other homes. So if we're following the documentation here, sidewalks are required, but you can request a waiver. So something happened in there, and I think that's what we would like clarity on.
Could the commission get comfortable with a recommendation to the city council to take up this issue, given the fact that they passed the ordinance? And so based on all the information that was presented tonight, that the city council take up this issue, given the fact that they are the only ones to have the ability to make the decision on the fees.
That's perfect, but I would like to tack on to that the inconsistent application is
Okay.
noted.
Round two, how about this?
Yeah.
Given that the commission feels that there was inconsistency applied with regard to interpretation, we recommend that the city council take up this issue with regard to how this was applied.
Yes. Do I need to restate it, or can I just
I don't think the chair can
motion
make the
that?
motion, so somebody else is going to need to
The
do
only
it.
thing I would change is that I think it was interpreted correctly. It was just applied incorrectly
Applied
and
incorrectly.
inconsistently. Because if it was applied, I mean, it was interpreted that he had to have sidewalks or in lieu of fees. That's what it states, but it was not
I think what,
applied correctly.
I think what, if I, don't let me put words in your mouth here, but if I understand, he's saying, I don't want to say anything's correct
I
because
agree.
we can't make the decision, punt it to council,
Mhm.
which we do have the ability to do. We can just say, we push this to council, correct?
I mean, I think that's what I think that is probably in the best interest of everybody at this point. Somebody want to try for round three?
Does
Procedure.
that mean that this agenda item is tabled? What happens to this agenda?
It's going to city council. Or that's what we're talking about right now, but we still have to vote on it. We just got to get the wording down with what we're all comfortable, or what we can get a vote on.
So I will make a motion to a recommendation of the city council, given the inconsistent application of this language, that they take it up for further review.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that passes, and we'll move forward to the city council. I want to thank everyone for your time tonight. I'm going to give us about a 30-second stretch break, just 30 seconds. So I'm just gonna we're gonna push pause just a second here. You're fine. Out there in the hallway might be up for our next one, but could you help me out and tell them that we're getting back in? Okay, I want to recognize everybody's commitment to that discussion. Thank you. I appreciate the thoroughness of that. And so with that, we will move into our public hearing items for this evening. And so we will move to take up the first public hearing item, request for conditional use permit, item A. And so Ryan, is that you? We've got you running all over the place tonight. So Ryan, we will turn it over to you.
Yes, so the applicant is right there. Okay, so we're good. This is a request for a conditional use permit for an extermination service in 01 General Office District. This currently sits on 4.40 acres at 783 Diane Lane. We looked at the projected traffic impact. Prior to this business, Triple C Outdoor Power Equipment was at this location. We don't see that there'd be much of an impact based on what this business is. Current traffic counts, McNutt Road is 4,500 average daily traffic near the Dave Ward Drive intersection. This was the best data point available from RDOT. We've looked at this. It is in the transition zone, which allows for more intense uses when sensitivity to adjoining residential areas is concerned. We think that this type of use would be appropriate for this area. We would recommend approval based on the following conditions. Operating hours are limited to Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. Any site improvement shall be subject to development standards as outlined in Article 10 of the Conway zoning code. Parking area must be striped and ADA requirements for parking must be met. Tree plantings required along Dave Ward Drive and Diane Lane. A landscape plan must be submitted to planning staff for approval. All signage shall be permitted and installed in accordance with Article 12 of the Conway zoning code. No zoning variant shall be issued as a result of the commencement of the conditional use. Upon conditional use approval, any expansions or additions to the structure as well as any changes to the use shall require an amended or new conditional use permit, and the conditional use shall automatically expire if the approved use ceases for more than 18 consecutive months. Any questions?
Thank you, Ryan. Are there any questions for Ryan? Sorry. All right.
Not this time.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay. And with that, we'll move into the public hearing. Is the applicant here to speak in favor? Would you like to come forward? While you're coming forward, if you could state your name and your address when you arrive at the microphone, and then any comments that you may have.
Wesley Sullivan's 21 Stonehenge Drive, Conway, Arkansas 72034.
Thank you. Do you have any comments?
No.
You don't have to.
I respect the city's decision. We are very courteous of our surroundings as a community. We appreciate Conway. And as a business in Conway, we just want to better Conway. So that's it.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone present to speak in opposition to this? I do not see anyone, so with that, I will bring it back into commission. Commissioners, what say you?
I motion to, wait, are we ready to? Yes, great. I move to accept the staff recommendation to approve the request with the conditions indicated in the staff report on the basis that as conditioned, the proposed use would not likely negatively impact adjacent property and will allow for appropriate use of the property.
Seconded.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right, with that, the motion passes. Thank you for your patience this evening. We appreciate you.
Thanks for giving us an easy one.
With that, we will move to our second public hearing item. And this is consideration to recommend adoption of the Oak Street Ahead Corridor Plan. Just for the minutes and for those listening, we did meet February 21st was our last meeting. At that meeting, it was announced that there would be a presentation, a joint presentation with the Public, City Council, and Planning Commission to review this plan. So many of the commissioners did attend that. I want to thank everyone for giving additional volunteer time outside of this meeting. And so that was presented. And so the commission has had pretty ample time to review that. So I will ask if staff has anything to present here.
I do. So tonight, staff is excited to request the Planning Commission to forward a recommendation for the Oak Street Ahead project to City Council for consideration. The plan has been extensively vetted by the Planning Commission, City Council, staff, and numerous stakeholders. In addition, a steering committee was formed in 2022, which included the Chamber, local owners and representatives, developers, the University of Central Arkansas Administration, Conway Corporation, planning commissioners, and city council members. At this time, staff would recommend that the Planning Commission make a motion to forward the Oak Street Ahead project to City Council with a recommendation of approval.
Thank you for that, Chris. For those online, there does not appear to be anyone left in our gallery, but just to make sure that we're having the right process, is there anyone that needs to speak from a public hearing standpoint on this? Do not see anyone. So with that, I will bring it back into commission.
Yeah, I saw the presentation. Looks like an awesome plan. Fully support it. And I'm willing to make a motion to send Oak Street Ahead to the City Council.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Adam, a second from Ethan. All those in favor, please say
Adam,
aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Aye.
Yeah.
We did
ahead.
want to try to get a recommendation for approval on that also.
I assume that you're,
I will amend my motion to also include approval.
okay. So I have a motion from Adam to move forward to the City Council with approval. A second from Ethan. Ethan, does your second still stand?
Yes, it does.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, with that, item B does pass. This does take us to announcements and additional business, so we'll move out of our public hearing item. Chris, I think you've got some announcements for us this evening.
I do. I just wanted to start. Madam Chair, if I can just for a minute, just to recognize my staff. I know that it's been we've had a really stressful workload lately, and I think that they've done a fantastic job. Beth, Ryan, Lauren, excellent work this week, and I appreciate your cooperation and work through some of the processes that we've had. One of the things that I did have was the P&D newsletter. I think that I sent that out. I have a few copies of it. There was some email issues with a couple of the commissioners. This is for the Historic District Commission and for the Planning Commission. This is really my way of trying to incorporate some communication with the department. I know that some of the commissioners on both of the commissions had some concerns about communication. I was a big surprise whenever I came here that I didn't know about. But
Good surprise.
yes, we wanted to make sure that we're kind of keeping you a little bit up to date. It's just once a month, but it's a quick newsletter. It'll have a little bit of around the office, news, events, anything that's important to discuss, but it'll also have a little bit of training on there. For example, on this one, we discussed, you may have noticed tonight that the chair of the board was a participant in the votes. That's a change to our policy. There was an unwritten policy, for example, that the chair of the Historic District Commission and the Planning Commission would only vote to break ties. Both of those individuals have agreed to participate in the vote because it's part of the bylaws. There's not a written. So that was a good place for us to stick that, just so everybody could see what kind of policy considerations we're looking at. If you have any questions that need clarification, then you can send it to me in an email. I may answer you quickly and then send it out to the full commission, just so we don't have repetitive questions and we have a means for communication throughout the month. If you ever want anything to be specifically addressed in it, you can feel free to reach out to me. For example, April is going to be all about rain. So I know that we have a lot of considerations on drainage, flooding, stormwater, different stuff like that. So we've reached out for the April newsletter. We're looking at providing some information about the difference between the three and how our engineering department looks at those. So if you need anything, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Chris. I would like to echo the great work that the planning department is doing along with the city. We couldn't be more appreciative of you. Chris, welcome to season 1, episode 2 tonight. And so we will see you back for episode 3 next month. With that, is there anything else from the commission?
I agree with the comments on staff, and I really like the newsletter.
Awesome. With that, I will take a motion for adjournment. I'm going to say, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.